Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you how to practice Git commands in a local folders on your machine in a very stripped back and simple way that doesn't break anything. Git is more than just memorizing a bunch of terminal commands. If all you do is memorize Git commands and then type them in, you'll end up in situations where Git gives you errors and it can be very frustrating to work out how to resolve those errors. It can feel like Git is fighting against you sometimes when it should be working as a tool for you. Well, in order to become more comfortable and more confident when using Git, you need to build up a much deeper understanding of what those commands are actually doing. And you can build up that understanding through practice. This is another video where the train in Train to Code means training. We're training and exercising our ability to confidently use Git. This video is broken down into these sections. You can use the chapter slider along the bottom of the YouTube to jump to one of these sections if you want to. Firstly though, here's a setup I'm going to be using to show you this. I've got a console window on the left and I've got a console window on the right, and they're both in this new folder I've called Practising Git. I've also got Git installed, which I can check with git -- version. And I'm also going to be using a bunch of terminal commands to modify files and things like that, but I'll pop a little banner across the bottom for each terminal command in case it's something that you haven't come across before. The first thing I'm going to do is create two empty Git repositories. So in each of these terminal windows, I'll create a new folder. Let's call this folder 1 and then folder 2. And then cd into these new folders and run git init. Git init creates an empty Git repository, and as this little message says here in the terminal, but what does it actually mean, initialized empty repository? Well, if we run dir command with /a, so that's the ls command in Linux systems, if we run that, we can see we've got this .git folder that's been created for us. You can open up something like Windows Explorer and you can see this hidden file folder here, which is this .git folder. And this .git folder contains everything that Git uses to manage this as a Git repository. So for this practice, I'm going to run git init in both these two folders, so that means we have two Git repositories, both with nothing in them. Right, let's create a commit in one of our repositories. If we go into the repository on the left and create a new text file using the echo command, then I can commit that text file to the repository by creating a new git commit. I'm going to call that commit from repository 1. If I run git log with this --1 line flag, you can see the commit I created, and you can run git show with that commit hash and you can see what's in that commit. Great. The next thing is to take this git commit and pull it over to the second repository on the right. So how are we going to do that? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to go into the second repository and add a remote. A remote in Git is a reference to another Git repository somewhere else that we can pull commits down from. Most of the time, your remote will be a GitHub server. So if you run git remote -v on any Git repository, you'll usually see a GitHub URL in there, or Bitbucket, or wherever you're using to store your code in the cloud. For this practice though, I'm not going to be connecting to GitHub. I'm actually going to add this folder on the left as the remote for the folder on the right. So you can do that by typing git remote add and then the name of the remote, we'll call it 1, and then a path to that folder. So if I do git remote -v, now you can see that it's added this remote and the location is up one directory and into that folder. Now that remote has been added, I can run git fetch and then git log. And as you can see, that's fetched the commit from our first repository and it's available to be checked out in our second repository. I'm going to run git checkout --track 1/main, which will check out that main branch from the repository 1 and it will create it locally in repository 2. The last thing to do here is to go back to repository 1 and do the opposite. So here we're going to add repository 2 as a remote, just like before, and that will allow us to create commits in either of these two folders and then pull them over to the other side. Okay, I'm going to test this out by creating a git commit in the second repository and pulling that over to the folder on the left. So we'll create that commit. And in the folder on the left, we can do a git fetch. And pull the commit across. Now we've got these two local folders with Git repositories and they're linked with Git remotes. We can start to practice some of the more complicated things in Git, such as rebasing. Now I have a whole video up here that explains what rebasing is, so if you need more context to this, then do check out my other video. But the main thing to remember is that rebasing is the process of creating new commits along a branch that perform the same changes as a bunch of commits that are in the wrong place. We can play around with rebasing by creating a commit in each of our two repositories like this. Add a new file to repository 1 and give that a new commit message. Then add a different file to repository 2 and we're going to give that a different commit message. Now if we do a git fetch inside repository 2, we can see that repository 1 and repository 2 have diverged. They're both on the main branch, but repository 1 has this commit as the second commit and repository 2 has this other one. I'm using git log with the graph flag here, that's that -- graph, and that just shows the commit tree in a bit of a nicer way in the terminal, and it lets you see how these two commits have diverged. So how do we fix that? Well, we can use git rebase, of course. Run the command git rebase 1/main. So that's saying rebase the head of this repository over the commit history of repository 1. If we run that, there's no merge conflicts or anything because we've created separate files. Then you should see that the folder on the right now has both of these commits on the main branch. And if we look inside this folder, it has both of these two text files here, so 1.txt and 2.txt. If you remember, those two commits created one of those files each. Git Reset is another command that we can easily practice in our repositories. Let's say we wanted to undo that rebase that we'd just done. Well, if we run git reset -- hard and then head with this little tilde and then 1, that means do a hard reset and go back 1 commit. The head ~1 means 1 commit back in the history from the current head position. Like this. Alright, merge conflicts, the dagger in the back of every Git user. A merge conflict happens when Git tries to merge or rebase two commits that both change the same file. So if we go into repository 1 and modify the contents of this first text file here, and we can commit that. Then go into repository 2 and modify the contents of the same file but in a different way. And we can commit that. Then if we try to fetch this and rebase it like before, we will get this merge conflict because Git doesn't know how or which version of this file to use. Now this is actually great because now we can practice resolving this merge conflict in a nice, safe environment. Remember, if we get stuck at any point in all of this, you can easily just delete these two folders, rewind my video back to the beginning and start all over again. You've not broken anything, you can just go through, create the two repositories again, link them up and start creating your commits again, so we're all fine. Now I'm going to attempt to resolve this merge conflict by using Visual Studio Code. There are other tools you can use to fix merge conflicts. Kdiff is a popular one, but Visual Studio Code has a really good merge conflict visualizer built into it. So that's what we're going to use here. So I'll type code and then dot to open up Visual Studio Code in this folder. So the first thing that we're going to see is this messy looking file here. This file is actually the current contents of the text file that needs merging. Those arrows point to the two versions of our file that were created in our two repositories. Visual merge tools like the one we're about to open here use these triangle angle bracket things to work out where the merge conflicts are, and it helps you visualize how to resolve them. You can actually just edit this file directly if you want, and I'd encourage you to play around with doing that just to see what happens and just so you get more familiar with what a merge conflict actually is. But for now, we're going to open the merge tool in Visual Studio Code and resolve this merge conflict like this. Type what we like in here and save it. And if we do rebase continue, you can see that it's accepted the merge conflict and it's continued our rebase and it's all worked fine. Okay, I hope that's enough to get you started practicing Git in local folders on your machine. You can do pretty much anything you like in these two repositories. And if you get into real pickle, you can just delete the folders and start over again. Deleting the Git repositories is as simple as going up to the parent folder and just deleting those directories. Git doesn't store anything on your machine outside of that .git folder that we saw at the start. So deleting a directory and then deleting the .git folder will completely remove the repository, and you can go back to the beginning of this video and you can create a new one again as many times as you want. Remember, this is all about practice. And it's all about getting comfortable, moving commits around with Git and just getting yourselves into problems and working yourself out of those problems. So I really hope this video has been useful. Please let me know in the comments section below if you've tried this out and how this has worked for you. It would also be great if you could subscribe to the channel. I post coding tips like this every week. In fact, in 2023, I'm going to make a real effort to make multiple videos every week. So any feedback you have is completely welcome. My name's James Charlesworth, and this is the Train to Code YouTube channel.